Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Kellam, and welcome to Encounter. I'll be your host today. I'm kind of a dreamer. Every night I have dream after dream after dream. And if I should wake up at 2:25 in the morning, and if I woke up my wife and told her the dream, I'd have all the details. I could tell her the plot, I could tell her who was involved, I could tell her who I dreamed about, I could tell her the color of the shirt someone was wearing. But if I wait till breakfast, a lot of those details are gone. I might have a feeling that there's a little bit of maybe I was outside, or there was a ramp, or whatever. The details are missing. The memories of dreams are quite fleeting. Well, dreams are one thing, but real life, lived moment by moment, that's a whole different thing. If your memories begin to fade very quickly, you can't remember very much about yesterday, and even less next week. Our guest today is the Reverend Cynthia Huling-Hummel. And I'm going to read your title off your card, if that's not too odd. The National Early Stage Advisor for the Alzheimer's Association, 2015 to 2016, which means you're kind of rotating off in that role. You were a pastor in Lyons for how many years?
I served the Lyons Presbyterian Church for 11 years.
And then you went to Waverly.
Waverly for 4 years,
Yep.
Yes.
And then what happened?
Well, actually it started back in Lyons, Jeff. I started experiencing memory problems. I was studying for my doctoral degree, and I realized that I didn't have any memory of the classes I'd taken. So that was pretty upsetting.
Sure.
All I could tell people was that I was taking Preaching 1, Preaching 2, and Preaching 3. It was very alarming. I started by visiting my family doctor, and of course the doctor did her best to help try and unravel the mystery of why I was forgetting so much.
Yeah.
And I went through an awful lot of testing, and then I moved down to the Waverly area and sort of started that process again. In 2011, I was diagnosed with amnestic mild cognitive impairment. Amnestic meaning that amnesia component, mild cognitive impairment. Oftentimes, or quite often, it's a precursor to Alzheimer's disease. And so in 2011, I had a tough conversation with my doctor about moving forward, that the stress of being in ministry with such an impaired memory made it very difficult. And it was causing me great angst. I just couldn't do what I needed to do and wanted to do.
Yes.
And so that was a turning point in my life.
Is there a history of this in your family?
Oh yeah, my mom died of Alzheimer's disease. My mom passed away. Her name was Claire Matthews Huling. She was a brilliant woman, Phi Beta Kappa from Brown University, a woman of great culture, a woman who raised 6 children while working as a high school librarian. And Mom just could name books and movies and be able to talk about musicals and art shows. She was just a Renaissance woman, but Alzheimer's took that from her one memory at a time. My mother's only brother, Austin, also died of Alzheimer's. Their mother, my maternal grandmother, Grandma Mimi, had what we would call senility many years ago.
Yeah,
That's what we called memory problems, hardening of the arteries.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a huge shock that I would have memory problems. It was just a huge sadness. I loved being a pastor. I loved everything about ministry. I loved planning worship and meeting with families for weddings and baptisms and even for funerals and being able to comfort people. I loved going out into the community and being part of the church council. I loved serving on the fire department as the chaplain.
I remember that.
Yeah,
yes,
I loved it. And yet I had such a hard time remembering people and remembering things that I'd done and things that I was supposed to do. So there were these 3 things that were going on. Oftentimes I would meet people in the store on the street and I wouldn't know who they were, and I would walk by them, maybe with just a smile, but a parishioner could perceive that as somebody who didn't care about
being
them.
aloof to
Right,
them,
that I was
yes.
being aloof. And oftentimes as a pastor, people tell you their stories, they make their confessions, they tell you about what's going on in a very deep and personal way. And they expect that you'll remember that and honor it and ask about it. And it's very difficult if a pastor doesn't ask those questions.
Sure.
How is your mother doing this week?
Sure.
And then it gets more complicated if you've forgotten something significant, like you buried the mother. You see how awkward that would be? I had a couple of really scary moments where my memory really failed me when I needed it to be right on. I was heading to do a gravesite service when I lived in Waverly, and I couldn't find the cemetery. I had to end up calling the local florist for directions.
Yeah.
I just couldn't remember. Now, there was only one cemetery, and I'd been there before, but I couldn't find it that day, and I had a family there waiting for me.
you. Yeah.
And so that was extremely distressing. So that sort of got me back into that testing mode of this memory thing isn't getting any better. I really need to find out what's going on. And of course the doctors were very kind. I went through lots of testing, and there were lots of theories. Could it be a thyroid problem? Could it be menopause? Could it be an injury from my childhood where I hit my head? What was going on? But part of that diagnostic process was going through this testing. They call it neuropsychological testing, and it's quite extensive, where they test the different memory domains, how quickly you're able to look at problems and visually understand what's going on, or they test your auditory abilities, lots of different tests to get an overall picture, where they then compare your test results with someone of a similar age and educational background.
See, I'd be afraid of that myself.
Yeah. Oh, it was. But instead of being on this end of the bell-shaped curve where I had hoped to be,
Right.
I was at the other end. One of the tests they gave me, the tester said, "Well, you're a Presbyterian pastor. You've got your doctorate in ministry. Name the books of the Old Testament." And it was like, okay.
Yeah.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and I started singing that
The
song.
song.
Genesis, Exodus, but I couldn't get past Deuteronomy,
Right.
no matter how hard I tried.
Yeah.
And the tears just rolled down my face, and I felt stupid.
Yeah.
I felt like, how could I not know this? This is my life's work. I've devoted my life to learning about theology and church history, and not to know the ABCs of my profession. It would be like a doctor not knowing the bones in the body,
Sure.
or a lawyer not knowing the landmark cases. I just felt like I was defeated.
So there's the depth of knowledge that you would bring theologically and in terms of church history and
Right.
the scriptures, but also the very practical thing of having people in your congregation that you might not, recognize in the supermarket.
Exactly. I was always introducing myself, saying, "Hi, I'm Pastor Cynthia."
Yeah.
And they'd say, "Yeah, we know."
And we know we sit in the third
Yeah.
row of your church.
But,
Yeah.
I didn't recognize people, and that's a real problem.
So once you had this eventual diagnosis,
Yes.
Then you had to leave your congregation.
I did.
And I've heard you speak once about this. You said that they were very, very supportive.
Oh my goodness, yes, they certainly were.
And the denomination was helpful in enabling you to, I guess, go on disability.
Yes, indeed. And I was so very blessed because the congregation just kind of wrapped their arms around me with love.
Wonderful.
And said, you can stay in the manse. I was living in the church's manse for as long as you need to. And we will assign somebody to work with you on all the paperwork that's going to need to be filled out. But they were extremely supportive. We had a farewell celebration. In some ways, it was like going to my own wake. It was very, very painful and difficult.
Yeah.
But they were wonderful, and the presbytery was wonderful. And it was very hard on them as well. You know, the church and the presbytery, it was not an easy situation for any of us. But I was angry at the situation and angry at the turn of events, and I was 57, and it just felt very unfair. So
Sure.
I was sort of stuck in that why me? And the challenge was to move to what next? And a dear woman in my church, an older woman, she said, well, Pastor Cynthia, God's clearing your plate because God has something special in mind for you. And Bertie proved to be right. And this is my new ministry now.
I love that image of clearing the plate. And,
yes.
yeah.
Well, you know, I didn't feel that way back then. I was angry and upset. I really was. I moved to Elmira, which was a wonderful choice for me. I wanted to be fairly close to my doctor, and I wanted yet at the same time to begin a new life, a new chapter in my life. But I didn't even know how to introduce myself. I'd been Pastor Cynthia for so long, and all of a sudden I was sitting in the pews instead of leading worship.
Sure.
And that was very discouraging, very disheartening. I just was angry at the whole situation and angry at
And how
life.
did you turn that anger then into something positive to move forward?
Well, there were a couple things. One is that I connected with the Alzheimer's Association, and that was by providence. I'm quite sure, divine providence. There was an ad in the paper about this group that was going to be meeting, talking about Alzheimer's over a period of 8 weeks, and it was like, if this is what I've got, I guess I better learn more about it.
Right.
And so I signed up for that class, and I sat in the parking lot and I cried. I just did not want to go in. I was so angry at the situation, and one of the leaders said, you know, we're here to let you know there's life after a diagnosis. Well, baloney, you know. I felt like the rug had been pulled out.
Well, you're angry, but aren't you frightened too?
Well, I was not so much frightened as much as I was relieved. Because all these years that I'd been struggling with my memory from 2003 to when I was diagnosed in 2011, you know, people kept minimizing it. I think they were being kind. Well, we all forget things. You know, we all have problems. Right. I can't remember where I put my car keys. And so I always felt like, I wonder if it's real or imagined. And so to actually have data to say this is what it is, and then I could, you know, begin to move forward. I had a label I could put on it.
Sure.
So that's really important, you know, connecting with the Alzheimer's Association, going to your doctor, and getting a diagnosis, or at least having a baseline if you're worried about memory. But that was one piece. The other piece was my mom and trying to remember her lessons. She was always such a positive person. You know, she used to say, into every life a little rain must fall. And it's like, really, Mom?
Right. Thunder and lightning all around.
But looking at the bright side. And she always said, you know, we need to be out and about and staying busy. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to have to find a different way to fill up my time. And I enrolled at Elmira College. I asked if I could audit classes, and I'm on my 30th class now at Elmira College. I'm taking French.
Wonderful.
So that kind of, that remembering my mom's positivity,
yes.
You know, looking at a situation and saying, what can I do to help other people? What can I do to stay positive and kind of switch my thinking around from why me to what next?
Yes.
So that was the second thing that really helped me, and my faith. Just remembering the words of that wise theologian, Bertie, from the Valley Church, saying, Pastor Cynthia, God's got something else in mind. You know, remembering the words of the prophet Jeremiah, I have something special planned for you, plans that will help you and not harm you. And kind of holding that together and saying, okay, well, I've got to trust God, that God's going to use this in some way.
Yeah. So that now, in this role as an advisor, you've been doing this for the past year. I know that you came to our church and you had a PowerPoint presentation, which seems like a wonderful way to communicate, but also to help you remember step by step as you give your presentation. You don't have to read it. You can just glance at the screen like the rest of us and get your cues. Yeah. What are the other ways that you cope day by day with cues?
Okay, because